I'm Sophia Tupolev, and this is your TV10 Weekend Edition, taking a closer look at the stories that matter in the Israeli economy. Today, we're going north. This week, the Israeli government rolled out a 74 million shekel fiscal experiment on its battered northern border, offering localized digital wallets and relocation cash to residents under fire. Basically, they're offering families what amounts to a one-time gift card, geofence to spending 2 kilometers from the northern border, and separately offering families of reservists 24,000 shekels to relocate. To the untrained eye, it looks like a standard regional stimulus. To the behavioral economist, it may look a bit like a profound misdiagnosis of the Israeli public. Are citizens facing existential risk rational actors optimizing for yield? If not, the state is inadvertently levying a regressive silent tax on captive populations. This is not the first time Jerusalem has opted for optical statecraft over structural repair. One only needs to look back at the universal helicopter money dispersed during the 2020 COVID-19 lockdowns on targeted 750 shekel cash dumps that inflated the national deficit while failing to save bankrupt SMEs. But while throwing untargeted cash at a pandemic creates inflation, throwing it at a kinetic war zone creates a far more dangerous illusion. This week in the newsletter, we examine the hard limits of fiscal policy and why you cannot hedge physical survival with a prepaid credit card. The macroeconomic modeling behind this intervention was not published by any senior economist, and the intended outcome of this capital injection is still not fully clear. Is the Treasury attempting to engineer a genuine regional recovery? Is it simply subsidizing survival? Is the goal to anchor a battered population? To maybe quietly bail out the failing enterprises around them? Here, the mechanics of the policy are telling. The government is utilizing complex fiscal architecture to incentivize a demographic it fundamentally looks like it misunderstands, making any structural objective harder to achieve. To look at why this macroeconomic tool will face challenges, to say the least, in creating positive effects, one must ask a fundamental behavioral question. What is the macroeconomic clearing price for human safety? This policy is working on the assumption that a one-time grant of 24,000 shekels to a reservist family relocating north or a prepaid digital wallet to northern residents can somehow convince a family to live under kinetic fire. Is that really the story? We have seen this behavioral miscalculation fail on the southern border in the past. In early 2024, the state attempted to empty expensive evacuee hotels by offering return grants, daily cash stipends, to Gaza envelope residents if they agreed to go home. The backlash was immediate. Residents argued that without rebuilt schools and absolute security, this cash was a bribe, not a solution. The state treated existential dread as a simple pricing mismatch, and that policy collapsed. For the average citizen, no financial risk premium can adequately compensate for existential danger. The state is therefore not engineering a demographic shift, it is simply subsidizing two groups who would likely be there regardless: those with zero economic alternatives and those driven by profound ideological conviction. A retail cash injection solves the structural problem for neither. Both the financially vulnerable and the ideological pioneer ultimately require massive state investments in physical security, resilient infrastructure, and more, neither of which can be purchased with a consumer subsidy. Compounding this behavioral miscalculation is a complete disregard for the physical reality of the northern economy. The entire region is currently trapped in a state of suspended animation. Normal commerce has effectively ceased. Local businesses are operating on skeleton crews, supply lines are fractured, and consumer demand is paralyzed by daily uncertainty. In classical macroeconomics, a cash stimulus is deployed to increase the velocity of money and spark a cycle of consumption, but you cannot stimulate a market that is physically constrained by warfare. Pumping consumer liquidity into an environment where the primary barrier to growth is physical danger rather than capital scarcity fundamentally misunderstands how markets operate under extreme stress. When an economy is in a physical holding pattern, businesses cannot simply scale up operations to absorb new demand. Instead, injected new capital behaves erratically, ensuring the policy outcome falls entirely flat in most cases. To understand why this stimulus may act like a leaky bucket rather than an economic engine, we must ruthlessly dissect the North Plus program. By distributing up to shekels per family via a digital credit card application strictly geofenced to a 2-kilometer radius on the border. The political echelon claims it is engineering a localized money multiplier effect. The pitch is simple: keep the cash in the community. In reality, the state has engineered a spatial monopoly that functions as a regressive tax. Israeli economic history is littered with these leaky buckets. Consider Yair Lapid's ill-fated 2014 plan to eliminate the 17% VAT on new apartments. Because the housing market was physically constrained by a lack of land and slow permitting, subsidizing demand wouldn't have helped young couples. It would have simply allowed developers to raise prices, absorbing the state subsidy. The North Plus program commits a similar macroeconomic sin. By hard-coding these funds to a devastated conflict zone, the state artificially traps consumer capital inside an environment where supply chains are shattered. Northern enterprises, facing exorbitant wartime insurance costs, logistical friction, and severe labor shortages, are forced to operate with deeply inflated pricing simply to survive. By mandating that northern residents spend their 2,500 shekel stimulus inside this hyper inefficient microeconomy, the state is intentionally destroying their purchasing power. Just as that 0% VAT would have enriched developers, the North Plus wallet reduces the resident to a pass through mechanism, so they're not the actual beneficiary of the stimulus. The government is quietly executing a bailout of northern businesses on the backs of the captive northern consumer, utilizing a digital wallet to potentially mask a structural failure. And if this is the case, this misunderstanding of labor mobility and capital flows extends directly to the 24,000 shekel relocation grants. The Treasury models this cash as a behavioral incentive, assuming that at a certain price point, labor and capital will clear the market. But the residents remaining in the North are not exercising a free market choice. They are trapped in a localized balance sheet recession. Their primary vehicle for wealth creation, home equity, has a mark to market at zero liquidity. A working class family cannot liquidate a home under Hezbollah fire to finance a move to the Gush Dan Tel Aviv central region, where real estate yields are breaking historic records. They do not stay in the north because a 24,000 shekel grant tipped their risk reward calculus. They stay because the equity gap required to leave is insurmountable. Their demand for physical security is perfectly inelastic, but their capital is structurally immobilized, frozen. Offering a relocation grant to populations trapped by illiquid assets is an exercise in optical statecraft that fails to alter the underlying solvency crisis. For institutional investors and macroeconomic observers tracking Israel's risk profile, the central theme of this week's analysis should be clear. Macroeconomic policy has an absolute ceiling. When deployed outside the realm of functioning markets and into the sphere of existential survival, it will not and cannot reach its intended outcome. State capital is only effective when it accurately targets the mental models of its citizens and operates within a functioning market. The Treasury cannot arbitrage existential risk for a captive demographic via digital cash traps, nor can it buy ideological loyalty on the cheap. The government cannot financially engineer deterrence. Until the hard power reality on the northern border shifts entirely, fiscal stimulus will remain fundamentally broken. True geopolitical risk cannot be perpetually offset by apps and grants. Eventually, the market demands that the bill will be paid at the Ministry of Defense. We'll be back tomorrow with your daily recap of Israel's business community on Substack, Spotify, YouTube, and beyond. Look for TV10 to subscribe. Have a great day.